I think the role of the permanent participants is crucial to the success of the Arctic Council. We are the people that are living in the Arctic and are being impacted by things such as climate change, things such as economic development as a result of the melting sea ice and so forth. And so the input that the permanent participants have to the Arctic Council influence the decision-making of the Arctic states, and that then becomes public policy, which affects the entire nation states, which in turn affects the regional domestic population. So I think for permanent participants to have a say in the direction of Arctic states is actually quite critical, because we are the ones that are not just living with the consequences of that, but we are the ones probably in the best position to advise stakeholders on how policy should be developed within the Arctic.
And in terms of resources, the permanent participants tend to be small organizations. They tend to have limited resources really to bring to bear on what has grown to be an enormous body of work within the Arctic Council. And in reality, the Arctic Council has grown a lot since its founding in 1996, where it was a relatively small, sort of cozy organization, to being now quite a large intergovernmental forum involved with many observer states, observer organizations, many working groups, many projects. And so really the demands to work and make a difference in the Arctic Council have grown. So the permanent participants, their ability to do the work that Joe referred to, that's become more difficult because of the increase of workload. And so something that's been talked about and discussed really since the inception of the Arctic Council has been how to provide support to the permanent participants. And truthfully, even though that topic has been coming up repeatedly over the course of the Arctic Council deliberations, there's never been a clear answer. And the Arctic states, they're bound by certain political limitations, I think, and it makes them difficult to support the permanent participants fully. So something that we are working on is really taking this problem into our own hands as permanent participants and trying to develop a funding mechanism that would allow Arctic states, observer countries, observer organizations, really anyone that supports the work of the permanent participants to make a contribution toward that in financial terms. And we're working to develop a funding mechanism that's transparent, that's clear and simple, easy to understand. And we're hopeful that this will form a part of the solution to the support of the permanent participants as the work of the Arctic Council grows.
One of the greatest challenges for permanent participants, of course, is the funding. Depending on, well, for me, for example, from America, my funding comes from the State Department. Well, they fund the travel, the hotel, and then usually the event has the food, but that's it. There's no base funding for us to be involved in the working groups. The working groups have meetings and they talk about projects. Well, those projects they talk about should include us. But if we're not at the table when they're talking about projects because of lack of funding, well, we're not participating. So that's the biggest challenge I see, because I believe that we have the knowledge, we have the data sets, but we just don't have the resources to either publish it or write about it or put it out there for the general public. We're lucky to have each other. Without Aleut International Association, my participation would be very limited. I'm very lucky to have our core funding go through Aleut International Association, because they've been around a lot longer than my organization. But I'm still effective. I'm still effective. You know, one of the things that we're very lucky is that Canada over the last of course the United States have the chairmanship right now, but in the last 2 years of the chairmanship of the Canadian government, the Canadian chairmanship was the biggest pusher to get our participation at the table, and they also created the Arctic Economic Council at the same time. But still at that, we were very lucky. We talked about that this morning, about influence. Well, Canada had the biggest influence on getting us at the table in the correct and right manner. In the last 2 years of their chairmanship, they got us to this point. So, influence is it's a very big part of it. For an example, I have a project proposal before the CAF. It's on the CAF work plan, 2-year work plan. I would never ever had that project on our work plan if it was not, if I didn't have the Canadian SAO as an ally. I couldn't get the United States SAO to sponsor it or to speak about it in any fashion. Unfortunately, her hands were politically tied, I believe, but the Canadians, as long as their hands are not tied, they're willing to help, and they'll do all they can to help you. It's a great, Canada is a great country to have as an ally, not only as an Indigenous person, but as a regular American.
Yeah, I think the other challenge we have is the human capacity, and I've heard even some of the nation countries complain about the amount of work that the Arctic Council has to do to keep progressing. There's so many working groups and task forces and committees, and it's important. They all do important work, and they deliver that work to the Arctic Council to make decisions on. So it's important that we participate in that. But as my two colleagues have said, the money is an issue. For example, I have to take leave without pay to come to this meeting. So I'm sacrificing my paying job to do this voluntary work. And for the most part, the people that do the work in a permanent participants are volunteers. And so they do it because it's something that is needed in the community, for example, or maybe in the region, or it's something that's going to affect their culture or way of life. So they feel an obligation to do the work that needs to get done to participate in the work of the Arctic Council, but to be able to find those people, good qualified people that understand policy. It's quite difficult, and then on top of that, asking them to leave their job for maybe a week without pay is an added burden to them. So it can become quite difficult to find the right people to attend the various meetings within the Arctic Council.
And, sorry, Chief Michael, but I would just add that that connection between the communities and the Arctic Council, that has to go both ways. We provide a conduit that means that the Arctic Council and its work, that's communicated, and what the Arctic Council is doing is communicated to people in our region. But also the needs and desires and wants of the people in our region, that has to get communicated to the Arctic Council. Otherwise, this policy discussion that we're talking about, it's not fully informed if it's not including what's happening to people on the ground. And so acting as a conduit, having information flowing both ways, it's tremendously important. And as Joe mentioned, and I think it needs to be emphasized, most of the people working on the Arctic Council, on Arctic Council work from the permanent participant perspective, they're donating their time. Very few people are actually paid to do Arctic Council work. And And so that fact that people are willing to donate their time, that says a lot about how important they think it is. This element of support that we keep talking about, well, money, funding, that's a big part of it. But it's other things too, and it's having the right person at the meeting, the person with the right expertise, but it also means sometimes we need to hire expertise because it's not necessarily something we have ready access to. So it's sometimes things like legal expertise, things like technical expertise. That's something we have to hire. It's very difficult to find people willing to do that sort of work pro bono or to donate that time to us. So that's an area where increased funding also helps. It's not the money per se, but it's the fact that we do need expertise that sometimes we have to look outside for.
And the other greatest challenge, of course, is having your knowledge recognized by the greater world. One of the things that I found out at the Arctic Council is if you want to speak to the Arctic Council and you want them to pay attention, it seemed like they pay more attention if you have like a PhD behind your name, or and it's like Jim said, you can always buy that, but and it's like Chief Joe said, you know, for me, for an example, I'll give you an example. For my organization, I volunteer all my time. I'm not paid, whether I'm here or back home or anywhere. I'm not paid. My other person that works with me here, Janine Jordan, she's not paid by the State Department. Christy Williams is not paid by the State Department. Benjamin Milot, all the people who work under the Arctic Athabaskan Council in America are volunteers. But the reason I picked out those people is because they're volunteers with credibility. They for example, Ben. I'll choose Ben because he's the youngest, but he's also a communications director for an organization that deals with all Alaska Natives. So you know, so when you choose your allies, you have to choose them. It's like buying a rifle. You know, you want to buy a rifle to shoot a polar bear? Well, you're not going to use a .22. You know, so you know, so it's like that when you go to the Arctic Council. You know, your knowledge that you bring there. You know, if you want them to respect your words or your intervention, you have to bring the right weapon, and sometimes bring that right weapon. It's just having an educated person with a PhD behind their name.